Good afternoon to all the participants and the speaker of this afternoon session. Let us welcome Dr. Dhrubayoti Bhattacharjee to this webinar entitled The 100 Years of Communist Party of China. Dr. Bhattacharjee is a research fellow of the Indian Council of World Affairs, ICWA. SAR's area of interest is Pakistan's foreign policy decision-making under civilian and military leaderships. Among contributing many chapters in edited books, SAR has published books on Pakistan's foreign policy decision-making. Apart from that, SAR has also written numerous research papers and articles in various journals, web journals, newspapers as well, for the Indian Council of World Affairs. He has made presentations and delivered lectures nationally and also internationally. SAR's area of interest also includes terrorism, human security, foreign policy decision-making, India and Vietnam, India and Israel, South Asian politics, political and strategic development in Pakistan and Afghanistan. SAR is going to present his lecture on the topic 100 Years of Chinese Communist Party, Key Challenges Ahead. Sir, once again, we welcome you to this webinar, sir. Now the forum is yours, sir.
A very good afternoon to everyone. I would take this opportunity of thanking Professor Subramanian, Professor and Head of the Department of Political Science, Annamala University, in giving me the opportunity of addressing this session. My lecture was preceded by 3 lectures by eminent scholars, amongst which all of them are very close to me. And it is a privilege of sharing this webinar along with them and exchanging ideas. As we have been experiencing an ongoing pandemic for the last 1.5 years and more, this sharing ideas on a digital platform has been extremely beneficial as we have been able to expand our horizon of sharing ideas. And at the present juncture, when the Chinese Communist Party is celebrating its 100 years of existence, I think this topic is extremely apt for discussing. And we already had 3 eminent speakers who have in detail discussed about the Chinese Communist Party and its role. And being the last speaker on the webinar, it becomes easier on my part because most of it has been discussed already. But still, I'll try to elaborate on some of the points which I have tried to point out. The Communist Party of China, which was founded in 1921, held its first Congress in Shanghai with the help of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union during a period of global political turmoil, after China had a decade earlier cast off 2,000 years of dynastic rule. At the initial Congress, Mao Zedong was the representative for the Yunnan province. He rose to become the commander of the Red Army in 1935 and became the founding leader of the People's Republic of China in 1949. China from 1949 till date has undergone massive transformations, especially dictated by the leaders of its party. From the beginning of the establishment of the People's Republic of China, the party had an inbuilt contradiction within itself. It was initially an underground revolutionary communist party in the beginning, but then after it took over and established People's Republic of China, it had to become a nation state to do all the things that all governments have to do, like fight wars, deal with international relations, and build the economy. One can say that the country has been successful in national strengthening, kind of establishing sovereignty over its land. Some would say over lands that can be contested, having a strong military, having a booming economy, and so on. The party has abandoned a lot of its early goals presently. Let's say the Mao years of reducing social inequality, especially starting in the 1980s and 1990s under Deng Xiaoping. The party kind of put forth this idea that they would become much more of a technocratic party, which was less invested in politics and much more invested in practical solutions to improving quality of life and growing the economy. Deng Xiaoping famously spoke about how some people in China will have to get rich before the rest of the country gets rich. And inequality in China has consistently risen since the 1980s. The periods of the late 50s and 60s, which saw collective farming, collective iron ore melting, and village communes, has been very much abundant from its earlier collectivist ideals of everyone working together in a very egalitarian manner. History writing has been part of the Chinese Communist Party's activities since the consolidation of Mao Zedong's leadership in the party in the early 1940s. Renowned scholars have stated that what's interesting with the Chinese Communist Party is that you see from a very early stage a very conscious decision that artists and intelligentsia or cultural production of which history writing is a part. It had to serve the interests of the party. What that means is that intellectuals have been employed in the imperial project in a systematic way. What also stands out in the history writing project in China is that the same party, over the course of 100 years of its existence, has approached the history of China and that of its own differently at different moments in time. As the party evolved, so did its relationship with the past. What was marginalized under Mao is now glorified by Xi Jinping. Critical moments of Chinese Communist Party's history has been suppressed or recovered to suit the party, while leaders once crucial to the party are now deemed as uncomfortable faces in its memory. While on one hand, discussing episodes such as the Cultural Revolution and the Tiananmen Square protests is almost taboo. On the other hand, important leaders of the Communist Chinese Party who later fell out with the party have been and are being erased from history textbooks. The significance of Mao in the history of modern China can never be overemphasized. Mao to China was what Stalin was to the Soviet Union. He was the founder of the People's Republic of China in 1949, and yet under him, the country experienced some of the bloodiest and most controversial episodes in its history. After coming to power, Mao consolidated his control over the country through campaigns against landlords and counter-revolutionaries. His anti-rightist campaign between 57 and 59 is known to have led to the execution of hundreds and thousands of critics of the party. The Great Leap Forward, an economic and social campaign initiated by Mao in 58 to reconstruct the Chinese agrarian economy according to a communist model, resulted in what is believed to be the greatest famine in the history of the country. Then came the Cultural Revolution, a movement that lasted for 10 years and led to unprecedented class violence and destruction of cultural artifacts. A 1994 report in the Washington Post suggests that Mao was responsible for more than 100 million deaths caused by the dozen or so campaigns launched by him between 49 and 76 when he died. Journalist Ian Johnson, in his essay, The Presence of the Past, a coda, stated, Mao is not just China's Stalin, someone who the Soviet Union could discard because it still had Lenin to fall back on as its founding father. For the Communist Party of China, Mao is Stalin and Lenin combined. Attack Mao and his era, and you attack the foundations of the communist state. Immediately after Mao's death, when China embarked on reform, the party had to explain the preceding period under its rule. The best way to explain the atrocities like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution was to put all the blame on Mao. This was been said by Sun Zhao, who was a reader to the Department of History at University of Essex. He said, at the same time, the party's coming to power had a great deal to do with Mao, so it cannot dismantle him neither. Therefore, they suggested that Mao had become an old man and was confused. Over the years, however, there has been a shift in the party's stance on the Maoist years. Under Xi Jinping, there has been a revival of Mao's popularity. Ironically, though, Xi is the son of a top communist official who fell out with Mao during the Cultural Revolution. His father, Xi Jinping's father, was personally persecuted under Mao's regime. Consequently, when Xi came to power in 2012, many thought that he might take a more critical view of the Maoist era. That, however, was not the case. Since President Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, he has consolidated his control over the infamously opaque party, with many experts calling him the most influential Chinese leader since Mao Zedong. In 2017, the Chinese Communist Party reaffirmed Xi's dominance and elevated new officials to support him in setting the agenda for the second largest economy in the world. Championing a vision for China's rejuvenation, Xi has pursued a more assertive foreign policy strategy, which has increased tensions between China and the United States and its partners. In the reform era that followed the death of Mao and his personality cult, Deng Xiaoping steered the party from strongman rule to consensus rule, which is also known as collective leadership, among the elite, and institutionalized the transfer of power from one leader to the next, with each president serving a maximum of 2 5-year terms. Now, these principles had dictated leadership succession since the early 1980s. Mary Gallagher, who is a professor at the University of Michigan, had written that this shift from the rule of a man to the rule of the party has been credited with bringing political stability and economic development to China. However, experts say that Chinese Communist Party has moved back towards strongman rule with the elevation of Xi Jinping. If the 18th Party Congress in 2012 marked the peaceful transition of China's leadership from Hu Jintao to Xi Jinping, then the 19th Congress in 2017 solidified Xi Jinping's ascent as a decisive leader. In March 2018, the Congress amended China's constitution to roll back term limits for China's president, paving the way for Xi Jinping to remain officially in power beyond 2022. Experts on modern China caution that relying on a single leader to navigate reforms could threaten the ruling party's survival. Elizabeth's Economy argues in the Foreign Affairs Journal that China's economy has already suffered because of Xi's control. She stated that too much party control, perhaps too consolidated in Xi's hands, has contributed to economic stagnation. Today, the party has harnessed the rewards of globalization and economic development, lifting tens of millions of people out of poverty. The Chinese Communist Party has reimagined itself as a driver of change, guiding the country's path to wealth and fueling a sentiment of national pride. Yet, fears of social unrest are persistent. Leaders share concerns that public outrage and activism over a host of issues, such as income inequality, environmental threats, land grabs, food safety, and lack of consumer protection, which could threaten the party's control and catalyze democratic social change. Many of the public's grievances have been brought to light on the internet, which has eroded some of the Chinese Communist Party's control over political communication, despite being heavily censored in recent years. To counter threats to its control, the Chinese Communist Party has sought to further embed itself across layers of Chinese society and the economy. With Xi Jinping's encouragement, the Chinese Communist Party has done so by silencing dissent, including on social media, as we know that in China we do not have any social media which is available throughout the world, like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc. Restricting religious groups, media organizations, environmental nonprofits, human rights activists, and lawyers, reining in the private sector and combating corruption. Challenges within the party to the leadership has also been dealt with in an extreme dictatorial manner, using tools of anti-corruption and treason to be factors for removing such challenges and threats within the party. While hailing the party's many achievements, including overseeing an economic miracle that transformed China into a global power in just a few decades, one notes some worrying trends. Under President Xi Jinping, who in 2017 declared China stands tall and firm in the East, the party has upended presidential succession norms, clamped down on internal discussion, and seen a rising wealth gap prompt more young people to embrace lying flat, effectively opting out of the rat race and adopting a minimalist lifestyle. What's worse, as Xi has said, is that China has already reaped a lot of easy economic gains in the past few decades. The tougher policy changes that lie ahead will directly hit key power centers in the party, from state-owned enterprises to energy interests to the automobile sector. Beyond a popular anti-corruption campaign that also helped Xi Jinping consolidate his power, he has also sought to entrench the party into all aspects of life, from education to social gatherings to the workplace. Local cells regularly hold party building events consisting of chorus singing, party history contests, and sessions to study Xi Jinping's speeches. With such total control, the party can be picky about who it accepts. It needs to be noted that Xi himself wrote 10 application letters before he was let inside the Communist Party. The acceptance rate of new cadres in Chinese Communist Party in 2019 was around 12%, making it almost as tough to get into as some Ivy League universities. Applicants must submit personal essays, undergo regular evaluations, and attend training sessions in a process that can last years. The rise of China's private sector, led by tech giants like Alibaba Group Holding Limited and Tencent Holdings Limited, has provided alternative routes to climb the ladder, as well as turn into potential threats to the Communist Party's power. Officials have responded by slapping down tech companies and testing the loyalty of party members. While China stifles dissent and does not hold democratic elections, its leaders still face pressure to improve living standards. Scholars at Harvard University's Ash Center, which tracked public opinion in China from 2003 to 2016, found that satisfaction with the government increased virtually across the board during that time, and that attitudes corresponded to real changes in material well-being. The aspirations of the people to live a better life must always be the focus of our efforts, stated Xi at the 2017 Party Congress, a once-in-5-year event that constitutes China's most important political gathering. For China, major challenges are looming. Within China, the number of births last year fell to the lowest level since 1961, forcing them to change the one-child policy to the three-child policy, which has added pressure to boost productivity and keep growth humming. Skyrocketing real estate prices, rising debt, and increased competition for the best and jobs are prompting younger people, particularly the flatliers, to lose hope in Xi's Chinese dream. Xi's moves to threaten Taiwan and crush dissent in places like Xinjiang and Hong Kong have prompted more Western politicians to view China's all-pervasive surveillance state as a threat to free societies everywhere. US President Joe Biden has followed Donald Trump in blocking China from obtaining advanced computer chips that will drive the modern economy, prompting Xi to mobilize resources to develop them on par with the push to build an atomic bomb in the early 1960s. That quest to produce so-called third-generation chips used in everything from artificial intelligence to electric vehicles will be a key test of whether the party can both maintain absolute control and spur innovation. Jack Ma, Alibaba's billionaire founder, saw the government pounce on his financial company and group companies after he publicly lambasted regulators for stifling creativity. So far, none of these challenges have seriously challenged the party's grip on power. Indeed, leaders have become adept at stoking nationalism to their advantage, whether it be diplomats lashing out at the West or social media users raging against tech billionaires. But while China has near absolute control on information, its citizens are also more connected to the outside world than ever before through virtual private networks that skirt the Great Firewall and international travel, at least before COVID-19 had hit. In times of crisis, like at the early stages of the pandemic, China's censors allowed a rare deluge of online criticism. The experiences of activists in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and even on the Chinese mainland show that the Chinese Communist Party is a ruthless opponent, but not an unbeatable one. The Chinese Communist Party's sharp power approach should be considered an extension of its united front method, a vision of the political process as a zero-sum game, and a worldview that distinguishes between friends and enemies. The resulting party state's governing approach is thus a two-pronged process of simultaneous co-optation and coercion, where proverbial carrots and sticks are applied to suppress any political opposition to party-state rule. In the case of Chinese Communist Party, in the mainland China, the party state has tried to win over waverers by adopting a rule by bribery approach. Those unwilling to align themselves with the party state have been at the receiving end of a rule by fear approach. In order to protect its monopoly on power, the Chinese Communist Party has gone to great lengths to suppress any potential challenges to its continued rule. It has not only invested more money on domestic stability preservation than on national defense, but it has also continued to use highly draconian means to intimidate and silence opponents of one-party rule. Among the repertoire of political control instruments are the highly invasive personal file system, the continued use of labor camps and re-education camps, the use of mainland China's psychiatric system to lock up dissidents, and the rise of alliances between local governments and organized crime, forming local mafia states, and the resulting phenomena known as thugs for hire. It is highly concerning that on mainland China's periphery, the Communist Chinese Party appears to have approved the rent-a-mob tactic to disrupt the democratic political process in Hong Kong and Taiwan too. The problem with the Chinese Communist Party's winner-takes-all conception of politics is that it has resulted in a highly elitist and exclusive political system. The criminologist Borj Bakin is on point when arguing that what we might see in China is not so much an exemplary elite serving the people, but rather the strengthening of a lawless elite looting China in the interests of its members. The continuous plundering of state assets has also led to very low levels of public expenditure for crucial public services such as on health and education. One of the unintended consequences of low levels of public investment has been the rise of rent-seeking in sectors such as the food processing industry, the health and education sectors, and China's media. This means that corruption is no longer limited to individuals and organs under the control of the party state, but is now a defining feature in every industry and sector in mainland China's business and society. On the external front, challenges to China's economic model are increasing as witnessed by the ongoing tussle between the world's two largest economies. It exposes another tension in Beijing's foreign policy, that of pursuing economic growth with trade partners while simultaneously conducting diplomacy with countries that are ideologically poles apart from Beijing. There are no signs of this abating in the near future, and it will hinder China's capability to shoulder greater responsibilities globally. Relations between Beijing and the West are meanwhile going from bad to worse. Behind an exuberant chorus of pandemic diplomacy performed by some senior Chinese diplomats in 2020, there has been a somber tone on international challenges posed by the pandemic inside the Zhongnanhai, the headquarters of the Chinese Communist Party. China, under the Communist Party today, is a major global power that is more formidable economically, more sophisticated diplomatically, and more flexible ideologically than the Soviet Union ever was. And unlike the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the Chinese Communist Party wants the country to go out and deeply integrate into the world to further its ambition. As it is, its foreign policy today combines a strange mix of high-octane rhetoric, intoxicated with pragmatism and past grievances. There is a strong feeling among its population that China does not get the respect it deserves from the international community, but the party, the Chinese Communist Party, can make China stand tall and big. This dangerous mixture of China's historical humiliation and its staggering economic success could prove a lethal combination which leads to a further deterioration in China's relations with other countries. The current diplomatic rift with the West will not help the party to fulfill its foreign policy priority, the creation of a stable external environment to foster its domestic economic development. This conservative maxim was advocated by Deng Xiaoping, but it should remain as the mantra for Beijing in its handling of foreign affairs today. In response to the COVID pandemic and a tougher international environment, Beijing proposed a new concept, the dual circulation strategy that promotes domestic consumption. Essentially, this is to boost the domestic economy's ability to power itself. But the key word remains dual. As a string of policy documents show, Beijing's economic strategy is not isolationist. Beijing is fully aware that it can only prosper if its foreign economic partners prosper, and it can only achieve resource security and the stability of its borders if its neighbors to the south and west cease to fight over territory. For the party, the biggest challenge in the future will be how to manage the financial risks involved in a debt fueled economy without reducing economic growth to levels that affect the personal wealth of millions of ordinary Chinese people and, as a result, foster social discontent. Although the party does not face any electoral pressure, anger over inequalities could undermine its authority and trigger resentment if the Chinese Communist Party fails to take actions that alleviate the people's pain. The Chinese people are watching closely. So are foreign nations, not least the United States. Life as a rising power with publicly stated leadership aims and reform ambitions is not comfortable. Even without an opposition party, Beijing faces ever growing scrutiny. The rest of the world still has a profound interest in a less turbulent and reform oriented China. While many of the leadership's recent decisions have disappointed those who hoped that Beijing would embrace a Western style of government, it is important to realize that the party is still finding its own way, and quite often it is about finding the path of least resistance without historical precedents. What is certain, though, is that its future will not be decided by the United States, but by the 1.4 billion Chinese people who have expectations of better life well before 2049. Foreign policy will not be a top priority of China's new leader Xi Jinping, predicts a new Lowy Institute analysis, China's Foreign Policy Dilemma, by East Asia Program Director Linda Jacobson. She argued that because China's new leaders will be preoccupied with pressing domestic problems, Chinese foreign policy will be reactive in nature. China's international role is not the foremost concern of the country's leadership. The analysis highlights that only about one-tenth of the 18th Party Congress policy guidance report addresses external issues. Domestic challenges such as ensuring China's continued economic rise, establishing the rule of law, and curtailing corruption will be the focus of Xi Jinping and the 6 other members of the Politburo Standing Committee, the ultimate decision-making body of the Chinese Communist Party. This may have serious consequences because of the potentially explosive nature of 2 of China's most imminent foreign policy challenges: how to decrease tensions with Japan over the Senkaku Islands and with Southeast Asian states over territorial claims in the South China Sea, along with other glowing disputes with its neighbors. A lack of attention by China's senior leaders to these sovereignty disputes is a recipe for disaster. Once a maritime or aerial incident occurs, domestic pressure will further narrow the room for maneuver of leaders in China and in each of the countries involved. The Chinese Communist Party has been central to the lives of the people, and now, as China pushes forward towards a high-tech future, you can be sure that they expect it to remain at the vanguard. For most Chinese, it is the all-powerful and authoritarian Chinese Communist Party that had uplifted hundreds of millions of citizens from poverty, undertaken large-scale infrastructure construction, and made China the manufacturing center of the world. For a moment last year, when COVID struck, the Chinese Communist Party was a bit shaken, but it quickly shrugged it off and undertook an aggressive strategy, helped bringing it under control, even as it rampaged uncontrolled elsewhere in the world. Contrary to what many expected, the Chinese Communist Party remains central to Chinese life and intends to stay that way. It is a time when no obvious challenges are emerging to its authority, and China has never enjoyed such international reach, economic strength, or military might. Yet, in a marked departure from his predecessors, Xi Jinping has been in a rush to tighten the screws on dissent, to expand technological surveillance of his people, and to assert new controls over private businesses, and to vastly strengthen his party's prerogatives and power. It is this contradiction between China's head-spinning authoritarian accomplishments and President Xi's head-scratching nervousness about the future that is most worth watching as the systemic contest of our times unfolds. Arrayed across from each other in these global sweepstakes for the future are the ruthless, technologically empowered efficiency of autocratic capitalism and the enduring, though dangerously challenged, attractions of democratic capitalism with its magnetic charms of individual rights and freedoms. It is the question of our times whether these two systems, as represented by Chinese communism and democratic liberalism, can agree to a set of terms that allows them to peacefully compete and sometimes even cooperate. Even if they do, one system or the other will emerge ascendant as the dominant rule setter for an evolving global order. One or the other is also likely to emerge as the more successful provider for citizens' needs. While the fragility of democratic societies has been on full display in recent years, including political unrest in the United States, it may be the less transparent challenges to President Xi's ambitions that are more decisive. The famous journal economist has stated, no other dictatorship has been able to transform itself from a famine-raked disaster as China was under Mao Zedong into the world's second largest economy, whose cutting-edge technology and infrastructure put America's creaking roads and railways to shame. At the same time, under President Xi, adds The Economist, the bureaucracy, army, and police have undergone purges of deviant and corrupt officials. Big business is being brought into line. Mr. Xi has dribbled the party at the grassroots, creating a network of neighborhood spies and injecting cadres into private firms to watch over them. Not since Mao's day has society been so tightly controlled. As Jude Blanchett writes in Foreign Affairs, his belief that the Chinese Communist Party must guide the economy and that Beijing should reign in the private sector will constrain the country's future economic growth. His demand that party cadres adhere to ideological orthodoxy and demonstrate personal loyalty to him will undermine the government system's flexibility and competency. His emphasis on an expansive definition of national security will steer the country in a more inward and paranoid direction. His unleashing of wolf warrior nationalism will produce a more aggressive and isolated China. One can only understand his rush now to crush all possibility of internal dissent and seize all opportunity of international gain as the keen reading of his own political lifeline measured against the emergence of the Biden administration with its efforts to reverse Western democratic decline and allied disarray. Xi Jinping likely has only a window of about a decade before his country's demographic decline, its structural economic downturn, and inevitable domestic upheavals threaten to reduce the historic possibility currently presented to him by his country's technological advance, its geopolitical gains, and his own current hold on power. This man in a hurry sees an inflection point to be seized, but only if he acts with a quick, decisive purposefulness and where necessary, ruthlessness. I will end by saying that under the Xi, China isn't only sprinting to seize a window of opportunity. Xi, as Jude Blanchett writes, at the same time has put China in race to determine if its many strengths can outstrip the pathologies that Xi himself has introduced into the system. In short, the test is whether authoritarianism, most compelling success story, can overcome its fundamental failings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. With your permission, shall we go for the discussion, sir?
Please.
Now the forum is open for discussion. Mr. Shaukat Ahmed Dar, you can go with your question.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Shaukat Ahmed, Research Scholar of Public Administration under the supervision of Professor Shaktivel, sir. So my question is, should the US view China as a threat or an opportunity? Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah.
So my question
The
is,
United States has always considered in the beginning, from the very beginning, from 1971, when Nixon practically opened up diplomatic channels with China,
okay,
considered China to be an area which has not been ventured into, because most of Europe at that point of time economically was saturated. For that reason, China was and was a market, was a sector which was not ventured into. For that reason, it was easier for United States to practically venture into China economically, as it had turned into the manufacturing the center for the world. Now, presently, in the last 2 decades, post 2001, 2002, China has taken the opportunity of uh, taking advantage of very lax international laws, very and not translucent, opaque business transactions by US firms, which has facilitated in the Chinese manufacturing sector as well as its technological sector.
Okay.
This Trump, during Trump's regime and as well as during Biden's regime has been one of the principal uh, challenges, how to counter such aggressive economic nuances from China. So, but unfortunately, China remains to be a 1.4 billion populated market. For that reason, as I have said in my presentation, it has to be a balance how to cooperate as well as coerce. Coerce to basically follow the international norms, regulations, where you just cannot plagiarize technology and copyright it and say it's your own. You cannot do that. You have to respect intellectual property rights of various other companies, of scientists and other technical giants. So like this coercion and cooperation goes hand in hand together. You can easily take another example when you basically look at US and China, of EU and China, of European Union and China. You can see that multiple European Union members have been extremely reticent, have been extremely cautious in opening up its markets, technological market to China. But similarly, Germany's largest automobile sector, which is one of the leading economic, the basic GDP of Germany comes from its automobile sector, and it's entirely dependent on China. For that reason, Germany cannot which is one of the foremothering leaders of the European Union, cannot practically say that we're going to break off economic or trade relations with China. It cannot. Practically, its entire economy will crash. And that is the same case with United States. It cannot say tomorrow that we will break off all trade ties and bilateral economic relations with China. It will be disastrous on US as well as global economy. For that reason, it is a thin red line where both, not only US, but the entire international community should coerce the Chinese leadership in abiding by to international laws, international regulations set by WTO, as well as cooperate in strengthening the, the global supply chains, which is already, you can see that in the last 1.5 years, there has been a trend of spreading out more, not concentrating into one sector or one country, but spreading out more so that if the country or China so decides that they will not be able to basically abide by international laws and regulations, then other options open up for international players, economic players, not so that it does not affect global economy significantly.
Thank you so much, sir, for answering the question. Sir, sorry for the interruption and asking for the second question, sir. If we talk about the US as well as the China, they are much developed in terms of the technology and all. Let's talk about the developing countries. They do not have much technology. They are dominated by the USA in terms of culture, in terms of polity, in terms of economic, in terms of technological advancements. Does the developing countries have any other strategy so that they can prevent themselves from the hegemony?
That's also a very good question. Like that becomes a very problematic situation for developing economies or developing countries, where like for the developing economy, the basic uh, demand which they have are foreign direct investments. The foreign direct investments for developing multiple sectors which remain very important for their development and growth, especially in infrastructure, in energy sector, in health, in education, and in all these segments, they need foreign direct investment. And we have seen uh, those developing economies are not extremely dependent on technological aspect, but more on the financial aspect.
Exactly.
And with regard to China, China has played this ball very strategically, and for the last, at least I can tell you, for the last 15 years, it has been turning into an institution in itself, like the Asian Development Bank or the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, where it's the dealings, the investment dealings, which China had with all these developing economies, cater to the needs of China. Now, the problem over here, we need to understand that when international monetary institutions or financial institutions provide monetary help, uh, then it becomes those institutions cater to the needs, the economic condition, and how it can come out of such economic condition for the betterment of this economic condition of that nation. So the financial institution practically gives financial aid, assistance, or loan on behalf of how that country can develop from getting those loans. But unfortunately, China has no such prerogative. Chinese prerogative is economic investments needs to be done on the basis of strategic and business purposes. For that reason, if China is investing a billion of to some country, it is not on a charitable basis. They are not doing any charity, but unfortunately, they are practically looking at in the forthcoming 10 years what will be the payback for China. It can be payback on the basis of trade, or the basis of economic benefits, or even when we have seen it is like this term is very much used nowadays. It's concept of debt trap diplomacy, like giving debts. How countries have fallen into such traps where this debt trap diplomacy practically has been mentioned in cases of around 50 countries, 50 developing economies, where such foreign investment was provided by China. So for developing economies, it is like you can see nations like in Southeast Asia, like nations have realized, even nations in like Bangladesh, where nation come to realize that when we take such investments or take such loan or developmental fund from China, will we be able to pay it back, or will it be possible for us to basically, or will that investment be beneficial for the development of that developing economy? Now, when uh, there have been instances, multiple instances, when we see that these developing economies have backtracked, like they had, like the previous government has went ahead with signing such investments or foreign loans from China, but the next government, after coming to power, they have backtracked and have practically rejected such foreign assistance from China. So in that way, I can say that the developing world has to be extremely cautious with regard, because the problem is, sorry, that China, with each and every country, the dealing or the when they give a loan to some country, the terms and conditions are always as per Chinese interests, and they are not transparent. They are mostly opaque. Like for example, I can ask you, I can tell you this, that one of the major assistance given to our present neighbor, is Pakistan, the China-Pakistan economic corridor.
Yeah.
Not a single Pakistani, I can assure you this, not a single Pakistani will be able to say the exact terms and conditions on which China has given this developmental loan to Pakistan on the term of China-Pakistan economic corridor. It is extremely translucent and sometimes totally opaque. Nobody knows exactly what percent of loan or debt they have to pay back, or what energy sector or what companies will have hold over what properties for how many years. And even we do not know that exactly, the Pakistanis don't know that exactly what or how Gwadar, which is one of their basic ports that they're developing, will be used in future. So Pakistanis don't know that, forget about the others. So in that way, such such trade partner or investment partner becomes extremely risky for developing nations, and they are realizing that. And for that reason, certainly, China is turning into, uh, though they have the capacity to give funds, but naturally, developing nations are much more wary in taking open funds from China on undotted lines. So that becomes one condition for the developing economies.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
I just read in the chat that this virus is made by China or not. This question is uh, should we cannot answer this question because the serious investigation has not a serious investigation. Was asked for by the international community, but unfortunately, WHO, the World Health Organization, did carry out an investigation after a year of the pandemic that that spread. But that also was carried out by extremely shabbily. It was not done in a proper manner, and the report itself was it was self-contradictory in itself. So we cannot practically immediately blame China that the virus was made by China, because that is the question. But certainly the point can be mentioned that the first communication or the first knowledge of COVID-19 came from China. Yes, so that the first spreading point was China. So that there is a sort of universal affirmation with regard to that. But was it made by China or not? I don't know if there is any universal affirmation, because that is an allegation that has been put forth by many scholars, by many strategists. But I don't know that it has been made by China or not. I don't think anybody does.
Excuse me, sir. My name is Aishwarya, and I'm studying 8th standard, and I would like to ask two doubts. And both are almost like the same subject. Like the first one is, do you think, sir, that the development of China is because of its economical rise? And my second doubt is, what do you think about the economical price, sir? Is it because of its spreading trade, because it's trading almost like in every state, I mean like every country? So what do you think, sir?
Certainly, I will fully agree that after China became a member of WTO in the beginning years of the millennium, this economic growth of China has been successful from that time period. We have to understand the Chinese mentality. The Chinese mentality is, during my presentation, I did mention that with regard to collective responsibility. Now, this mentality of collectively basically working together in the growth of the country, in the beneficial or the benefit of the country, has been ingrained into the Chinese mentality for around more than 70 to 80 years. And this mindset has triggered, like when the opportunity came in, like I can tell you that even Chinese laborers, when they work in various manufacturing sectors, the conditions over there of those Chinese laborers who are working in these manufacturing sectors are extremely harsh. There are no concept of the human rights getting violated, or how much time are they basically spending in with their family. But as their production hours is significant, because nobody basically has the courage to look into it. So when you have such a labor force who is diligent and who are practically are totally allegiance, they have their allegiance to the party and the country in producing so much, because the quantity is so much, because that is how within 20 years, the one country has turned into a manufacturing hub of the world, because they have turned their capacity of growing in quantity. Neither, see, for that reason, we practically don't say about Chinese, the quality of Chinese products, but we do always speak about the quantity of Chinese products. So the quantity, the volume is so much. For that reason, it became like and because naturally labor price in China remains to be significantly low. So prices of those commodities remained also significantly low in comparison to similar products being made somewhere else. So in product competition, Chinese commodities always stole the market. So in these 20 years, this rise of a Chinese manufacturing sector has triggered the Chinese economy in such a way, which again has been associated with the real estate industry and various other industries and sectors which are associated with manufacturing. So the growth of, or the development of China has been possible because they have understood, like as I have mentioned in my presentation, that isolationism is not a policy that China can adopt today. Because a Chinese growth or Chinese development or China being the second largest economy today has been possible because of with the cooperation of other cooperative nations with which China has been trading with. So it cannot practically today take off or start a policy of isolationism and say that, okay, you have so much problems with China, so we are not going to do trade with you anymore. China do not have the option of doing that, because if they do that, their economy will immediately fall down to a level where they will not be able to survive. So it is on the basis of participation, but as I said, a question that was asked before, like how can then China or how can other countries counter? It is again coercing China to follow international trade laws, international laws, regulations on intellectual property, on maintenance of quality than quantity. All these, if the international regime, international economic regime can coerce China in forcing China to basically follow such international norms, naturally, the global economy will like benefit out of it rather than a single country benefiting out of it. I think I was able to answer your question.
Excuse me, sir, and I have another doubt.
Yeah.
And in our India, Kerala's communist party is always progressive and can win over. So why can't other states in our India progress? Why can't other states communist party can't progress? That's my
yeah, certainly India is not a country where it is a multi-party system, amongst which Communist Party remains to be one of the parties. Unfortunately, China is not a multi-party system, it's a one-party system. Chinese Communist Party is, because you can even see when July 1st, the events took place in Beijing, it was always considered as a party state. China is not only China, but it's Chinese Communist Party. It's the party state. And whenever our party state comes into question, like then it becomes very difficult for, like, as I have mentioned in my presentation, that you have to choose amongst them. Like when you have a single party rule, you have to, the people, if you have a population of around 1.3 billion or more than that, people have to choose of giving up some of the liberties if you want to have a single party system. But unfortunately, India is a democratic party structure and it is a multi-party system. And Communist Party is one of the parties. It's now presently, it's more or less a regional party. It has got the regional party character in the last 10 to 15 years. It was a national party before. So we cannot practically say that Communist Party itself, if all the states can practically, if the Communist Party is able to win all the democratic elections in all the states or 29 states in India, that will be the people's will, because democracy is, again, as I said, it's on the basis of the will of the people. If people think so, then it will happen so. It is not the will of the party. In China, it is the will of the party on which people practically act. In India, it is the will of the people on which parties act. For that reason, there is this major difference in the understanding of India and China, because in India, the Communist Party is a party amongst number of 100 parties more. But Chinese Communist Party is the only party in China which dictates how people will live, how people will think, how people will work, and how people will join the Communist Party. Because it is, even joining the Communist Party of China is a very tedious process, as I mentioned in my presentation. So it's just not the Communist Party. If we think about India, it is all the parties taken together which strengthen the democratic roots of our country.
Thank you, sir, for clarifying my doubts.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Navin.
Good afternoon.
Sir, good afternoon, sir. I'm Navin, PhD scholar in Annamalai University, Political Science. I have one question. So somebody says the former USSR lose its domain because of USSR respected all ethnicity groups. USSR gave the equal rights to all ethnicity groups, but China, China not like the case. China didn't give equal respect to the all ethnicity groups. China following the one nation policy. Do you think China's one nation policy is gave any role for development of China?
It will be totally incorrect to say that under the Soviet Union, it was again, as I said, that when a communist party comes to power, like in Soviet Union, for example, it depends on the leader, exact present leader concerned, how he looks at the party and how he steers the party and steers the country back. Because even in Soviet Union, the Communist Party of Soviet Union was a party state. It was the party which dictated terms to its people. So if the leadership thinks that there should be significant, I can say not freedom, but I can say relaxation of identities surviving along with majority identities within the community, it becomes like even during the regime of Stalin, significant ethnic suppression amongst various groups and communities throughout Soviet Union. So I cannot practically say that Soviet Union practically did not suppress ethnic groups and communities. But in China, there is a problem. This is a problem that the Han community is one of the principal, it's basically the principal majority ethnic group, which practically dictates or is part of the Communist Party. And they do not entertain any other religious, sectarian, or ethnic group to practically usher, or even though in literally on letter wise, they practically promote various ethnic groups. But when we see in action, we find that there is a severe dominance or suppression by Han groups over other ethnic groups. Now, unfortunately, being the Han practically being this majority population of the Communist Party, there is not much reprimand with such suppression taking place. You can consider that in Tibetans and Uyghur and various other in Mongolia and in other other ethnic communities as well. So I cannot say that practically, but this has not triggered till date. I can tell you, this is not triggered. The suppression is so rigid, the surveillance is so massive. Uh, it has not yet triggered any significant amount of violence. If that violence did trigger, then the state machinery has been very successful in suppressing such revolution, or not revolution, but rebellion taking place amongst ethnic groups. But I can tell you this very clearly, that amongst various provinces, there is serious apprehensions with regard to not the Communist Party, but the interests of the Han ethnic group. And there are serious disbalances between them. But with regard to the Communist Party of China, the Communist Party has been extremely very clear, where they have stated that all people within China remain parts of members of or Chinese. For that reason, they do not segregate on the basis of ethnicity. But in action, there is certainly segregation taking place. But fortunately, the suppression of the state authority is so fully in control and in total. For that reason, such rebellion has not been able to basically be successful at any point of time for the last, at least from 49 till 21.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Ashmita, you can go with your question. Yansri, if you want any clarification, you can go on. Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank you, sir. Actually, your presentation is very informative and interesting, sir. It touched China's massive transformation with its leaders and touching historical perspectives and Chinese cultural resolutions also, sir. Like China's strategies with USA. Thank you so much, sir, for joining with us and having a very lively interaction, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a ton.
And dear participants, for these past 2 days, we are having 4 interesting lectures and informative lively lectures. So on behalf of the organizers and Department of Political Science and Public Administration, we express our sincere thanks to all the resource persons, starting from Dr. K. Sindhil Kumar from Alagappa University, Dr. Biswajit Mohapatra, Northeastern Hill University, Dr. Jagannath P. Pandey, Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, and Dr. Dhrubayoti Bhattacharjee, ICWA. We also extend our thanks to the university authorities for permitting us to conduct the webinar. We express our heartfelt thanks to our Dean, Dr. Ram Gopal, Faculty of Arts, Annamala University, for his guidance for the successful conduct of this webinar. I express my sincere thanks to my head of the department, Dr. C. Subramanian, the webinar director, for giving me the opportunity to be the co-director of this webinar. Our thanks goes to all the staff members and of our department and supportive staff of our department for the support they have rendered for conducting this webinar. Dear participants, if you see, conducting an offline seminar doesn't need much technical support when we compare with a webinar of this kind. Fortunately, we have excellent technical experts with us who made this webinar a successful one. The technical team is Mr. Sivanesan, our student friend, and Dr. Jagannath, who are behind the successful conduct of this seminar. Our heartfelt thanks to them. They designed this webinar brochure and working for these 2 days in the technical aspects. And dear participants, my thanks goes to all of you, because without you, this webinar is not possible. And thank you one and all. And all the participants and the registered participants will receive the e-certificates. You can download the e-certificates from the Annamala University website within 2 to 3 days. And all the participants are requested to send the filled in feedback form. We request you to fill up very carefully so that your name and institution address will be copied from that only for the certificate purpose. Thank you one and all.